Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the tour section. I want to start by a very special and a very hidden tour, and it's being led by a visual artist of great acclaim. But let me start by asking you if you knew that West Bengal was at one time, during the colonial rule, Asia's richest realm, especially in the 18th century. The Rajas, or the Zamindars of that time, left a legacy etched in poetry of clay, but soon dust and moss has covered these walls. Let's uncover their secrets on a journey with the visual artist and historian Soumyadeep Roy, who reveals this unique heritage and the spirituality of the Shantiniketan's finest terracotta temples. Just a little bit about Soumyadeep. He is acclaimed visual artist, as I already mentioned, and he has exhibited globally, participating in art and exhibitions and residencies across India, UK, Nepal, USA, NYC in particular, South Korea, and Bangladesh. He is also a published author. He founded Heritage Arts and Walks in 2015, and since then has been curating some groundbreaking, well-researched immersive historical and cultural art walks that have been receiving a lot of public appreciation. I think it comes a bit from his being a center in charge of the prestigious Artashila and Shantiniketan, which must have taught him to combine the influences of his life, the modalities of his art, and the ability that he has, a very rare ability, to truly tell a story. Merging this with diverse heritage forms, he curates these unique experiences. He has once even created an 18 feet scroll painting as a site-specific installation as a tribute to the late Wajid Ali Shah on his 200th anniversary. Soumyadeep is back in Lucknow and once on the trail, so we will ask him about this. But today we take a trail to the Surul Rajbari. But it's not just the Surul Rajbari, it's what's behind Surul Rajbari that we are going to be seeing. Soumyadeep, can we start this journey? Yash, can you play a bit of the journey so we can see where we are going?
One of the critics had mentioned how you handle something as daily as clay with the delicacy of how you would handle gold, with the details and all the ornamentation and all the depictions of art. Hi, I'm Soumyadeep Roy. I'm a visual artist from Kolkata. I'm interested in history and historical narratives.
My work specifically has been on Wajid Ali Shah and his shift in the 19th century from Lucknow from Awal to Kolkata. So mostly the 18th, 19th century overlaps, and that's how heritage works. And I've been doing heritage work for the last 9 years now.
Oh, wow.
And so this, of course, in Shantiniketan, this will be my first work.
I think terracotta art, especially on temple and mosque structures, on buildings, is very specific and unique to Bengal, because terracotta has been practiced across every civilization almost across centuries, but to have used it in a narrative form on building structures is, I feel, very unique to Bengal itself. I mean, of course, we can connect it back to the Chandraketugarh time period of ancient Bengal. But even I was more interested in the recent terracotta structures where you have these stories being told on a building. I mean, you're not just looking at a building, but you're actually looking a house full of stories in a way. But of course, you cannot see the temples just in isolation, because it's built in a culture of other mediums of expression as well. So you would have singing, you would have other performances, you would have other crafts weaving in into this art form. So it's built in an ecosystem of these different art forms getting together. And then you just have then just the memory of the last standing memory of 18th 19th centuries in these temples. So now, because Bengal becomes such an important center, both agriculturally, it has such a large produce, and also cloth. So cloth from Bengal was very sought after in the Mughal court as well as in the European markets. Muslin, of course, you must have heard of. So not only muslin but also silk, and which is why the different East India companies try to get hold of Bengal, because then you're getting both the produce of the cloth as well as certain particular things which were only available from India. But then around the 18th century, then these provinces start building very fancy architecture. People mention it to be from the late 1700s, but possibly the more accurate date is 1805. Shurul becomes an important center, and how the state of things were in the subcontinent context. You would have then around the different parts of Bengal, especially this part of Bengal, which is Birbhum. So Birbhum is like, it has this particular red laterite soil, which is very friendly in terms of making terracotta, and terracotta itself is a long tradition. So it goes back way to like literally ancient Bengal. But both of them together here, it's very specific, and it's specific to the Rar region here in Bengal, and it speaks of such a local language because they're using clay which is from the land, and they are telling stories which are from, again, the larger subcontinent, both connecting it to the contemporary everyday life of rural India and connecting it to the mythology of the land. So that is what I find beautiful about it, and so different from and also similar in certain ways of the other temple cultures across India. But these would all have different temples surrounded all across Bengal, and they would sort of be spread out, because it was rather the presence of the Europeans which sort of grows parallel with the terracotta structures that are being built around this time. It sort of comes in and brings in a language of cosmopolitanism, I feel, because you have all these mythological scenes from the Indian mythologies like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, but at the same time you have maybe a lone Portuguese soldier or someone wearing an European hat, as we saw today, coming into these stories, like, and they weave in very seamlessly, which is what I find beautiful. And the patronage, of course, it's again being built in an environment, so it's all connected in terms of how you see them as a tradition that has been supported not just by, say, individual families but also socially, because it's so many families who are commissioning these works. Whenever I meet Shutradhars, who are the communities who have made these terracotta temples over generations, over centuries, whenever I meet them, and every time I've worked in collaboration with them, I love how their Shutradhar practice of literally still using the string to measure, to make, is still being done. It's such a simple tool, it's just like a string, but then that's used to literally build these enormous structures and like these ambitious projects, and it's all so simple, because they knew exactly what proportions were to be used and how to use the clay, the same clay that we are walking on, how to use that and mix it with, again, everyday things like lime or jaggery or whatever they use to actually make it stay so that it survives for centuries, and we still get to see it after maybe 200-300 years, even now in the present. Usually you have scenes from the different mythologies of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. But then the fun part here is that along with these mythologies, you also have stories from contemporary scenes. So you might have story like the Elokeshi scandal, that sort of, the Tarakesha scandal that sort of shakes the whole of Bengal in a way, coming into the terracotta panels. And in places like Hitampur, for example, you almost have nothing religious on the temple surface, and you have these different European figures on the panel.
As it changed, as it progressed over time, uh, houses and families kind of changed, and there were more nuclear units who might not have needed an entire house to share, and they could have lived in smaller houses. So these things changed. People migrated, people moved, people passed, people went through different crises. So all of these factors actually kind of changed, definitely, the architectural pieces that they were, because every piece of architecture is in a way reflective of the times they are from. So these Rajbaris come from a particular period of time, and therefore they existed in that particular period of time.
So Tagore was always very vocal about art growing from a local context, and of course, there are plenty examples of local art forms being incorporated into his artworks. With terracotta temples, again, he was very vocal and he was very interested, and the kind of efforts that were made by, say, Mukul De and like the different photographers from Japan who would come and photograph through the 40s and the 50s. I think that clearly shows how Tagore was very aware of how this intangible cultural heritage needs to be preserved and how it's a part of a further growing of our culture. The Shantiniketan artists, especially post the establishment of Kala Bhavan and how they worked here, sort of in a very conscious art making, art practice environment, they would have actually had then traveled to these different terracotta temples around, and that is where it reaches an international stage, because Shantiniketan is introducing all these people who are maybe not from here, initiating them to this terracotta traditional culture. I think in the contemporary art scene, we talk about a lot of the use of multimedia, and it's like the merging of different mediums is spoken about a lot. And I feel like the terracotta culture has already had that. You already have the singers connecting it with the stories, with the art. So it was already there, and it was not just a single painting put up in a white cube gallery space. So I think what the current generation of artists are trying to do was already seamlessly being done in these terracotta traditions, in these cultural settings. So I feel that is something that we can maybe sort of see as a parallel with, in terms of like when we're trying to find these solutions, these previous generations had never had these problems. They would have had their solutions much prior and in a much more playful and mature way, maybe. In a sense that all these structures, whether it be a mosque or a temple, they are public structures which sort of involve the community. So now we have so many community-led projects and involvement of the communities in so many art projects. It has a certain sense of, in the sense of it has to be made. But in these cases, they were already there. Like that groundwork was already done. So I feel that sort of should give us that perspective to re-evaluate our engagements with communities, our understandings of communities, especially in cases when structures like this already exist and we have predecessors who've worked with these problems and have come with solutions. So, like whether we are making the same mistakes or if we are actually ignoring the solutions that are already there. So Birbhum, the entire Ra region really, is exactly where all the major temples are. And Birbhum especially is the land where you have so many of these rich ornamented temples all around. And this whole Ra region is sort of like a treasure trove, which I feel has not been explored as much as it should have been. And it's now sort of in certain cases in dilapidated states, But again, it's only here that we have it, and it's very unique maybe in the whole world. It's just this region in Bengal particularly that has it. So I think it's very unique. And this walk, which is why I feel is important, because I think someone needs to put out a reminder that this was already done. And every once in a while, if we actually take a look around things that we have around, which we feel are passive, which we don't maybe take a deeper look into, if we take days like this, maybe 1 or 2 days, where we look deeper into it and then we reflect on it, maybe then we'll be able to think more. We'll be able to see the same things of our everyday life in a different lens.
Wow, you really did transport us back to a different time. Soumyadeep, before I ask the questions, I'd love to talk about your success stories, about how you will use fellowship, your studies at Kala Bhavan, and the amount of work you've done, the body of work you've done, the way you've represented India globally or the global South globally. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Thank you so much for this, Sonia, and thank you for the wonderful video, and to all of you for doing this.
Actually, thank you, not me, because it was all of you. And just as a disclaimer, this was done at the Bengal Biennale. This is something that the Biennale has introduced, and actually Soumyadeep has introduced, is raising these walks, these curatorial walks, to an art form. So we'll discuss that point later, but let's start with a bit about your background in education.
So I actually did not formally study art. I studied literature at St. Xavier's in Kolkata. And my idea was to sort of study literature while continuing with my arts, because I started pretty early since my school. So I was practicing, and the idea was that I would not go to an art college, but continue with my own art practice and have an individual voice of my own. So that's how I sort of continued. And while doing this, I'd been like exploring my own city and my city's history, which then sort of brought out all that was around. And, like when you're looking at a city's history, it's not just the city's history in isolation, but like the larger province, like Bengal's history, and then also India's history. So that's how I got interested in that, and that's how eventually is what I worked on.
Tell us about the various scholarships, the fellowships, the way you've represented India and Nepal on a global platform.
So for me, it's been specific subjects which I've been working on for long periods of time. So, for example, right now I'm in Lucknow, and this is where so I'll be doing my exhibition my exhibition opens tomorrow. And this is another subject that I started working on since 2017. I mean, constructively since 2017. And it has been working with communities and like the people who shifted from Lucknow to Kolkata in the 19th century. And these stories sort of I got involved in. And then the thing was to not just look at a story or look at a piece of history, but to see it again and again through different lenses and over a period of time. Now that it has been, like 7-8 years, my whole viewing of it has changed. And therefore my whole artworks that developed around it, they have also changed. So for me, it's been long engagements, and it's been certain topics which initially for me seemed very separate. So for example, this was an art grant that I got from the German consulate in 2017, which sort of then continued into this research. And then there was another fellowship I was working on Chitpur in Kolkata. So that also started in 2019, and then it continued through and through. And then over a period of time, I found out there were these overlaps between certain histories from Chitpur and certain histories from Lucknow and Metiaburuj, these histories, which at the start would not have seemed, related at all. But it's these further explorations, and I think like long engagements for me are very interesting, because then I'm just not like working just for a week into making a painting and then I'm done with it, but it's a larger body of work which maybe sort of lives on in me, and that makes it more real for me.
Extremely interesting. Um, when did you feel the need? So India has had a vast culture and they have a lot of guides and tour experience curators. But when did you find the gap, the missing gap, that you realize that we need someone who's a storyteller, someone who's an artist, someone who will raise this whole curatorial walk to a different level where you can actually immerse the people like you did to each one of us who saw that video?
Uh, to be fair, it had to do with actually showing my own artworks, because every time I'd have an exhibition, and usually art spaces have this kind of sense of aloofness where people don't exactly feel welcome into an art gallery, and they feel like a little intimidated about what's there, about asking questions about maybe artworks. And that I feel is a little unfair to people who are not from the art world. And therefore, we sort of cut off a larger audience, which is why when I started having my exhibitions, which was my first solo in 10 years ago in 2015, I made sure that I actually was able to tell the stories that I was making the works on. And I did regular walkthroughs of my exhibition. And because my works are based on a certain history and a certain mythology or a story, I sort of found it interesting that there were so many stories which I thought were, taken for granted and people maybe knew, would not be known with like certain audiences. And that's when I started presenting like my artworks along with the stories. And that's when I realized that people really can relate to things when you actually tell them in the form of a story. And then eventually it started from my art journey itself, and then different museums and different organizations, they started approaching me if I would do these walkthroughs for them for their artworks and their museums. And that's how I eventually got interested in this, and while at the same time I was already working on the history of the city. So then I thought of, it was almost like this organic journey together that all of it went on.
How does being a visual artist actually influence the journey that you create?
For me, looking at the world is through this lens of art. And it's not just only just visual art, but also through music, because I've been trained in Indian classical music, and I've also been trained in film studies. So it's also this popular culture and also in a certain way like high culture, which kind of weave in together into this practice. And I think that's a way of looking at the world, looking at the artworks around you, looking at different things around you. So I think that is how I try to sort of see it as.
So, say when you were planning or you were prepping for the Sural walk, can you tell
Yes.
us what your process must have been?
So for the Shurul walk, my process would have been also looking at the different terracotta temples, the trails I would have done prior to this, and in context to that, and also at the same time studying the different periods of history, because Shurul not only like does it stand as a testament to this 18th, 19th century history, but it's also related to like the development of Sriniketan itself. So then, how does it transform once Tagore sort of gets involved into this, and once Sriniketan starts to develop around the same Kothi of John Cheap, who was responsible during this trade period, and then how that same John Cheap's house is then taken over by Tagore and the different people from the ashram. So it's then like these leaps between these centuries, and that is what I was trying to see. Because otherwise, if you see them in isolation, they are different histories. Like, say, some people are aware of Sriniketan development, and then some people work on the 18th, 19th century terracotta developments. But the fact that they're happening around the same area, around the same region, and these same structures would be inhabited by so many different people is
sort of very interesting, and that is why I actually started the Shurul walk with the Upasana Griha, which is the glass temple in Shantiniketan, which is like the most iconic temple of Shantiniketan. But I wanted to start with that because that temple is not at all like any other temple around. And the fact that its inspiration is not actually a temple, which is what I found interesting, because Tagore's father, when he went to England, he actually saw the Great Exhibition structure, which was a glass house. And that's why I started the whole walkthrough with a banana, the Cavendish banana, because the person who grows this banana in a glass house is the person who gets the commission to make the glass house for the Great Exhibition in England. And then that same glass house becomes the inspiration for this temple in Bengal. And how then it sort of, ties it all together, how this temple would have been connected to a banana is what I wanted to sort of see. And that's why we started at this glass temple, and then we went to see the terracotta temple and like the older histories.
Can you tell me the synergy between the temples and the Rajbaris, the wealth of the Rajbaris, and why did they actually decide to build these temples? Because they were building these glorious homes, and why did they decide to build the temples? What led them to building the temples?
So the temple culture was already there in these 18th, 19th century contexts. So building terracotta temples was seen as something really something as a virtue for the family, and they would do it nonetheless. And it's not just around the Rajbari complexes that you have these terracotta temples, but you would have them all around the different villages and different across different communities, because these sort of became these community centers, and it's sort of a place for congregation. It's a place for daily rituals of daily performance, and sort of they become markers of the land. So, which is why when say someone's making a Rajbari, they don't see it as anything separate as from, say, making a terracotta temple. So now most of the terracotta temples that survive are around the Rajbari, but you would actually have even many more spread across the region.
Were they in the family houses or the background of the family houses, or were they something that was more, like you mentioned, community oriented? Was it something to bind the community, or was it just for the family?
It was mostly to actually bind the family, but you would also have certain particular temples which would be for certain family members. Maybe the women of the household would sort of pray in these certain temples. And again, with in certain cases, you would also have women who come from maybe a different kind of a worship practice, and they would maybe build another new kind of a structure for their worship. So all these parallels would sort of continue, and the ones that we see are again mostly the family temples that would be there, and this would again go through several changes over a period of time, because then this again falls under this whole legalities of real estate. There are these certain rules about Debottar property, which would literally mean God's property. So like that whole property would be named like after a certain god, and it belongs to that god. And legalities do not allow other institutions to intervene into them. So then the families again sort of it's more like their house gets saved by that temple rather than the other way around.
Interesting. When you, as a curator, work with these temples or work with any such subject, how do you balance storytelling, history, and getting the person immersed? Because honestly, very few of us in today's day and age, in this, 2.5 era where we're just one click away from everything, how do you get them immersed? How do you balance that very thread-like balance to keep the interest still there while you're giving the right history, you're telling the story, and yet you're balancing it with keeping attention spans going? Can you tell me a bit about this?
I think the entire credit is to the makers and the artists who come before, the artists who've actually sculpted these structures, these temples, and also like so many generations of artists who've told these stories of mythology of and also history itself, because history itself, like I said, is so interesting. So it's sort of, I think for me it starts as being a listener of these stories, and also like an active audience and a viewer. So I try to listen, I try to see all that's there. And then from there, I try to sort of, sieve into it, and then sort of make it more precise and more fun for the people who are there. So it's sort of more like a conversation then. It's sort of trying to make this into a conversation, and sort of I just become a medium of these stories. That's all. Like I'll sort of share them.
How beautiful, how humble. But when you plan, or when you write, or when you put your storyboard together, when you put your visuals and your work together, do you at any time plan what kind of emotion you want to evoke?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do see as to how a story is presented, because it also changes. Like I think the narrative changes the way you see things, so that becomes very important for me, and especially in certain cases where it's something maybe very sensitive, like say something with a famine and like a loss in the community. Then how I see it, and uh, also then to question my own sources, because in certain cases they might have been written like it becomes a question of historiography, because this history might have been written from say a colonial perspective, and then I have to sort of see it myself, and see it from my own perspective as to uh, how I see this same story, which has been told maybe in a different tone, but see it more in a relatable way, in a more sensitive and a more empathetic way. So that's what I try to attempt at.
That's truly interesting again. Um, Going back to your emotions, your personal emotions, do you have the sense of time travel or very deep nostalgia when you look at heritage projects?
I absolutely do. I think it has to do, all of this has to do with my daydreaming and sort of traveling. Like I'm very fond of traveling, both in terms of spaces. Like right now, again, I'm in Lucknow. I'll be again traveling to Delhi and then to Rajasthan, and so I keep traveling all through the year, honestly. And I feel that like I don't just feel happy about traveling in terms of space, but I also want to travel in terms of time, and which is the only thing you can do through all of this, like through art, through music, through history. So I like this whole idea of travel, and for me, travel is not just travel across space, but travel across time as well.
Wow, really interesting. Have you experienced any challenges when you kind of explore such big heritage projects, when you take on such narratives where you're probably the first verbal storyteller after that period? Because let's face it, Indian history, because of the many periods that it's been through, the conquests, the challenges, doesn't have a very good written history. It's more a
Hmm.
spoken history. On you, you have this onus of being the storyteller of today. Do you have any challenges? Do you have any people who are critiquing you? Do you have people who do not hear you clearly? Or your own onus that, oh God, I'm the Sutardhar today, not
Yeah.
I'm the today's Sutardhar. What I say, especially in a generation that's being recorded, will live forever.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. That is what I feel. I feel like it's a big responsibility, because there's so much that if I feel like I'm maybe missing out on, and it happens so often that I feel like I missed out on this, and I should have incorporated this into the narrative as well. But it's mostly this about like missing out, which I feel is a big responsibility, because if this then gets sort of left out, it sort of gets left out forever in a way. So that I feel is a problem. And another problem I feel is also this navigation, because especially to do it in places which are maybe sparsely around. So, for example, with the Shurul walk, I wanted to actually do it in 3 different sections of Shurul and Shupur and Itonda. But again, this would have been sort of sparse because they are all sort of away from each other. And this navigation is sort of the problem, because I think if it was possible to do it with all 3, it would have been a larger overview. And ideally, I would have loved to have had a more a larger exploration of the space than to have like just a particular one. So
Am I
that is
right?
there, and also a lot of accessibility in terms of certain structures where maybe we would maybe I can go, but I maybe would like to bring more people and sort of have a more deep engagement with the space. So
That's the point I was about to bring out. Sorry for interrupting. But that's the point I noticed, that when we were looking at the Itonda temples or even the Hitampur temples, a lot of the temples, a lot of the Rajbaris have been converted to something else. For example, one was a police khana, one was a school, one was just off the public because someone was poaching on the land. So how does this hamper your work in growing awareness for these places?
It becomes then this whole challenge of making people understand what this is about, what art is about, and that I think is a problem, like a big problem in India in general. So, for example, my exhibition itself that took place recently, it was again I would have to then speak to people and explain what an exhibition itself is. So these are challenges, but I also think this sort of gives you a reality check about the work we are at, and then again for me it's very exciting because then you're also getting a new audience involved because they are also very curious as to what is exactly happening.
Again, the onus point comes in. You have on your shoulder, and you have been doing, is creating awareness for a heritage that's completely forgotten. We want to talk about that. Let's face it, because before you, how many people remember this place or know of this place? So you, in your own intuitive manner, have been stirring awareness for the Terracotta Trails of Shantiniketan. How do you feel you're going to impact the legacy of this land?
I feel that this would sort of, the idea was again when Bengal Biennale had approached me, the idea was to do it in Shantiniketan itself and to do like a heritage walk of Shantiniketan itself. But I thought of wanted to go beyond that because there's already so much that people know about Shantiniketan, and I think that's the whole problem of not getting limited just to the immediate time frame and the immediate space we are at, but to go just a little beyond maybe, and both in terms of time, both in terms of space, and see what's there. And it's just this curiosity that I personally have within me, which I try to sort of spread with like the people who join me about having curiosity about the world and about what's
around. Can you share any ways or any memorable moment where you started actually documenting and understanding this heritage of the Rajbaris and their homes and the terracotta temples? When you first started documenting this, what piqued your interest? What stirred your curiosity? Could it be their family histories, their personal beliefs, the stories which were on the walls? What was it that kept getting your attention?
For me, it was like very simple. As a visual artist, it was art. It was art. It was the style on the walls and how how effortlessly these forms were weaved in and how simply and sometimes humorously these stories were told. So for me, it started with art as to looking at these forms, trying to read them, and then getting into their stories and their context.
Just because of the shortage of time, I would love to go speaking with you throughout and understanding this history. But tell us about Studio Bari. Tell us about this beautiful passion project of yours.
So Studio Bari is this project I started 6 years ago, which was almost around this time when I was already working on these projects, but the city sort of kept losing these houses, and it still continues to keep losing its different markers because Kolkata is known for its the yellow cabs and the trams, which are both going to go very soon.
Yeah.
And similarly, the different houses that you see around the city, which almost become the identity of the city, they keep disappearing like bubbles. So for me, this was this attempt to sort of hold on to it together. And for me, as a visual artist, it's sort of this whole like a realization of the dream world that I have in my head out into a physical space. And that was the entire project. And this was tied again to my own family history, which I now studied and researched into. And I was able to trace up 25 generations going back 1200s, and then looking at identities of my own family, and which is what was very exciting to see how much my family had moved within the subcontinent. So I grew up learning that I am Bengali, that I am from Bengal. But while doing this research, it turned out that in the 1200s we were somewhere in Rar Bangla, but there's this hint that maybe we were from somewhere in southern India. So then I think it also challenges how we understand ourselves as like am I then a Bengali? Am I from South India? Like what am I? And I think that is what was very interesting, and that's why I did this entire exhibition on my family history, of this history from really a distant past, and also very immediate history. Like I worked on my memories with my own grandmother, my own uncle who's still alive. He's 87. So interviews with him, and how I did transect walks. I did methodologically, I did transect walks with him, where he sort of, spoke of the same spaces that exist now as to how they were in the 1940s and the 50s. So this was all together, and the idea of Studio Bari is that it's this art space which sort of brings out all these different stories together. And also I have this room called the Khwabga, which is the dream room. So it became this room for collective sharing. So people would come every Sunday through the course of this exhibition. And I continue to, once I go back to Kolkata, maybe continue this in some other form, into this room of dreams where people come and share dreams. So for me, it's just this, like a very whimsical artist's house that has somehow has been realized and is a real physical space somehow.
I love the layering of your stories. I love the way you layered your thoughts and visuals and everything. Do you want to take us through your current exhibition that you are now hosting and having in Lucknow?
So right now in Lucknow, again, I'm doing this work which I started back in 2017. So it was on the people who went with Wajid Ali Shah in the 19th century, who went to Kolkata from here, all the way from Lucknow to Kolkata. And this story is on them and not on Wajid Ali Shah. So this story is on like the different people from different professions who went with him. So especially I have this section on Dr. Ramesh Kumar Saini, on whom I had written a story which was published in a book. And his ancestor Motilal, who would have gone from Lucknow in the 19th century with Wajid Ali Shah, and then post Wajid Ali Shah's death was sort of forced to open a shop, a pan shop in Kolkata, in Metia Village. And that pan shop had been run over 5 generations until Dr. Ramesh Kumar Saini, whom I met and became very close to. So he continued to run this shop despite the fact that he was a homeopathic doctor. So he would run his medical chamber at night and he would run his pawn shop in the day. So you would have people coming to his shop asking for medical advice. They would be like, I have a problem in my knee, please give me a medicine. And that is what was very curious as to how this person who runs a pawn shop also hands out medicine and handles his patients at the pawn shop. So I shot his pawn shop in a 12-hour shot, in a 12-hour video. And another pawn shop here in Lucknow, which is where this family again goes from, near the Charbagh station. So their shop, again, another 12-hour video so that's night to the morning, and Ramesh Kumar's shop from morning to the night. So it's like these two almost like moving paintings. So it's like a video diptych that I have. And then I have these series of drawings of the people who migrated from the 19th century from here to Kolkata. And then now recently, right before coming to Lucknow, like in a single day, honestly, I finished this scroll, this 5 feet by 18 feet scroll, which is again this tribute to Dr. Ramesh Kumar Saini, he's no more. He passed recently, a couple of years ago. So I wanted to do this entire exhibition as a tribute to him, to this doctor and a panwala, and then his ancestor. So that's what this entire exhibition is about. It's called Huzn. Huzn is based on Wajid Ali Shah's text, which he wrote on in captivity at Fort William. It's called Huzn-e-Akhtar, which would literally roughly translate to the depressive state of things. For Huzn would literally mean the depressive state of things for Wajid Ali Shah. And so then it's in 3 sections. One is the pan shop section, which is called Gilori, which would literally mean pan.
Yeah.
The second section is called Ishqnama, which is like these love letters which are sent from one city to another in the form of the people and the portraits of the people. And the third section is this imaginary letter and this story that I made on these 2 lovers who get separated because of this whole shift. So one of them stays back in Lucknow and one of them goes to Kolkata. And then later, the person who stays back in Lucknow, another shift happens, they go to Kathmandu. So because that's what happens, Begum Hasrat Mahal, she actually goes to Kathmandu after 1857. So then from Kathmandu, this person, she writes the letter to her lover. And then all of the story is narrated through this letter, and all of this comes out, and all of this sort of then speaks of a future Lucknow, which would then continue to survive in maybe, different ways, maybe not in a physical form, but in a form of ideas, in a form of stories. So that's what. So it's about the past in terms of the Ishqnama and the letters, the people who come in the form of the present with the Gilori and the pan shop, and the future, which is again through these different arts.
Thank you so much for your time. I could keep going on. Thank you for taking us on this very, very special journey. And Soumyadeep, thank you. Thank you everyone who's attended, and thank you, Viyash.